The whole world is sick.
Are you worried about America? I am.
Believe the impossible and you can do the incredible.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of The Catholic Patriot. I'm your host, Dr. Peter Howard, and I am very excited for today's guest, and I think you're going to love it as well. I have Ted Flynn joining us across the country in Virginia, and he's, I think he was just telling me, he's 10 or 11 miles from, what is it, CIA headquarters, but we'll find out when we bring him on here. Ted, welcome to our podcast. It's great to have you here.
What a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, usually I don't like to get into a long description of a bio, and I'll honor that here too, but Ted's is very impressive, and the reason I want to highlight some important parts of it is because the things that I've invited Ted to come on and talk about are things that I've been speaking about for, I don't know, probably 15 years. But Ted has studied these things 15 times over in many respects than I have. And I think I've been blessed to have a solid education on these points when we're talking about the dynamics that drive world history, especially modern history, and the signs of our times. We talk about our Blessed Mother. We talk about the anatomy of the enemy, you know, who is behind it. And we get into, especially in my course, the final hour, the Freemasons, how the church has seen them. Anyway, this stuff is real, it's true, and we're blessed to have somebody who has been immersed in this for decades. And so I just want to share with you real quick just a little bit about Ted's background. He could tell us himself, but I mean, I'll say this. I got introduced to Ted's work, and I didn't realize it when I was in college. Back in the 90s, I went to Franciscan University, and my mom, thanks be to God for our mothers, she's the one who really got me on track. She had probably first editions of your books, was The Thunder of Justice. And that book blew me away because I was just going into that kind of conversion moment. But Ted he's an author. He's an international speaker. He's traveled over 50 countries, spoken to, I think, in looking at his bio, it was 700 venues of the world. He writes endless articles. It sounds like Fulton Sheen in the sense of how dedicated he was in speaking and in writing. But just to give you an idea, he is been a Washington resident for 44 years. And going back to 1979, he was a fellow of the Fellowship Foundation, the sponsor of the National Prayer Breakfast, which we're all familiar with. He has worked with his wife, Maureen. They co-founded a crisis pregnancy center and counseled thousands of young women and men on the physical, spiritual, psychological effects of abortion. And then eventually they decided to put their efforts and their concentration on teaching and forming people in the faith, as that would have a greater impact in the culture to stop the scourge, basically going at the root cause rather than always the effects. And then that really spawned their apostolate, which was originally called Signs of the Times, and now it's called Signs and Wonders. And it's been a magazine now it's 35 years in the making, and it's reached people around the world. And that magazine has had an impact in my own life. So I'm very grateful for that. And you may also know Ted and Maureen Flynn because they are responsible for the International Week of Prayer and Fasting that's been going on for 28 years. I didn't realize it had gone back that far. And it's held in Washington at the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. So he's a dedicated warrior when it comes to really knowing what's going on. But he's also, listen to this though, he's he's been respected. His works have been brought in to colleges and universities, and he's served as the chief economist for the Mine Safety and Health Administration, and helping to retrofit power plants in Poland after the fall of the Berlin Wall. He's the president and founder of Max Cole Communications since 1993, which you may know is a publishing company. And he's attended the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, American University, the University of Fribourg in Switzerland, and the London School of Economics, England. This is a skeleton outline, but he was, and Ted can tell you when I give him the floor, because I want to kind of basically let him speak the rest of the time, is his works, especially one he was telling me about that I'm excited about to get my hands on. It's called Hope of the Wicked. It's a bestseller on the political philosophy of the New World Order. 1,200 footnotes, 500 plus pages. These are the kinds of works that we need. It's a long work, but to have it all there, I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of tens of thousands of pages, of actual documents that he condenses. You just can't beat that. And his latest work is from 2020, Diabolical Disorientation: The Roots of the Crisis in the Church, the Nation, the Culture, and the Family. This is at the heart of what we do at the Fulton Sheen Institute, and so it's an honor to have Ted on. And I hope that's just a few bulleted points. This man knows what he's talking about, so let's listen carefully. So Ted, thank you so much for joining us. Would you begin by sharing the story that I've been wanting to know about of your encounter with Fulton Sheen the year before he died? I think it was 1978, that had such an impact on your life. I know your wife was like, you got to let Ted tell the story, so I'd love for you to do that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, here I realize I'm speaking to the Fulton Sheen Institute. And Sheen had a profound impact on my life, and which was a very much of a serendipitous moment. And it started actually quite a bit back, but I had been in school in London in the mid 70s, and my girlfriend had sent me a book called Mere Christianity. And I had been reading a lot of philosophy, which economics is really philosophy because there's really no right or wrong answers to much of it. It's a rational thought versus an irrational thought, and trying to come out with some sort of synthesis. And so I'd been reading Schopenhauer, Hegel, Marx, Feuerbach, and a lot of philosophy, Dostoevsky, Nietzsche. And when I read Mere Christianity, I realized that if I'm really I'm pursuing truth, and I don't pay attention to what Lewis is saying in this book with very profound arguments, I'm an absolute phony if I don't pursue it. And so then when I came back to Washington, a month later, I was given a book called Peace of Soul by Fulton Sheen. And that was kind of the 1-2 punch. I mean, those two powerful books, arguably two of the most powerful books for Christian apologetics in the entire 20th century, and possibly since Cardinal Newman in England, with a lot of his Apologia Pro Vita Sua and other writings. And so through a job that I was offered, it was a 1-year fellowship. It's funny, I've never actually told anybody this story other than just a couple of friends, and here I am telling it to the Fulton Sheen Institute. And so I had been offered a position with the Fellowship Foundation, which by design, it's a 1-year position, and they offer it to 2 guys every year. I was chosen. They ask you what you need, and I was given that. I was newly married in 1978, and I was offered the fellowship in 1979. And I recommended to the leadership, which the only way you'd know it is through the National Prayer Breakfast. I mentioned that they should have Archbishop Fulton Sheen there because he was getting up in years. And so they did invite Sheen to the National Prayer Breakfast. He was the first Catholic ever to address the National Prayer Breakfast, which was known as an evangelical group. That's its primary function. Billy Graham had been involved in it, and many other people in its formation. And the first year was in 1953, under President Eisenhower, who really okayed it and supported it. And so I'm going, I think, a little longer than I wanted here on this story, but it's been a long time and it had a big impact. And so after Sheen spoke, he had had open heart surgery months before, and his thoracic surgeon was with him. And I was actually feet away from him when he spoke, because I put myself at the front of the auditorium, which was at the Hilton in D.C., and it's where he spoke. And President Jimmy Carter had been the president. It was 1979, and I think you can probably even go back on Google or somewhere in the internet and find out what he said there. But after he spoke, I ended up going up into his hotel room, and he was with his surgeon. And I got a chance to spend several hours with him. And the key part for me is when I told him that I wanted to be God's man. I had been reading a lot of scripture that had always been my love. And I couldn't get enough of scripture, especially the Old Testament, where you see if the people disobey and then this happens. And so the if then clause, I call it. So I was up in his room and I told him I wanted to be God's man. And he said to me, my advice for you is to never join an organization. And I'm 26 years old. I was married only 6 or 7 months. And so the previous May. And so, I found a little odd, but here is a man who I think he passed in late 79. And I think he was maybe somewhere near 80. And so here's the wisdom of a guy who I didn't know a lot of at that point other than Peace of Soul. And I learned a lot more about him even in the 80s and 90s, listening to the tapes and other books that he wrote. And what was the one he wrote on the Blessed Mother, The Woman I Love or something?
The World's First Love.
The World's First Love. And I had read that, The Angel's Blackboard, and some other stuff. But the part that was most amazing was his spirit. That's what I learned later about his holy hours and this and that and the impact he could have on people. And so I'm 26. I had traveled literally around the world pretty much at that time. After I left Switzerland, I just kind of went east and just kept going for almost a year. And so we're leaving the room, and we talked about spirituality and being focused and this and that. So we're leaving his room. I'm 26 years old, and he's leaving the room in a wheelchair with his surgeon. He could have walked, and he did stand up in his speech. Mm-hmm. But it's what happened is he literally said to a woman who I think was a Jamaican woman who had that cart, with all of the hotel supplies for the rooms, and it was out in the hallway. And the way he said to the woman, "Could you move the cart, please?" And it was with such love and tenderness. Here he is, Fulton J. Sheen, who had a career like very few others in the world ever, and could be credited in many respects would be the father of television and the gospel in the 1950s with his TV program. And so all of a sudden he just says that in total gentleness, and I burst out crying. He must have thought he had a mental case in front of him. And it was just such a spiritual experience with the gentleness he said to the woman, "Could you please move your cart?" And I had read a little bit about him and knew a little bit about him then. And so, that's the impact that he can have on a person's spirit through his own spirituality. But his advice to me was that if you ever, when you join an organization, what happens is you become captive to the charism of the organization, and you won't really necessarily promote the gospel in all of its truth that the Lord is asking, because your promotions will be, and your advancement will be precluded from peer pressure. So that's what he was really saying. If you really want to be God's man, don't join an organization. And I can say to this day, I've touched a lot of subjects that a lot of people won't talk about. Unapproved apparitions like Medjugorje, Garabandal, and this was like 30 some years ago. I've done a film on the dogma. I wrote a book on the political philosophy of the New World Order. And I've spoken about a lot of subjects that a lot of organizations don't feel comfortable with. So therefore, that's what he was saying to me. And I look back on the wisdom of that statement, and I haven't joined an organization for that reason.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, that kind of confirms, I guess, some of the things that I guess the decisions that I made as well. When I talk to people who are Catholic entrepreneurs or getting into that over the last 5 or 6 years, they've all gone that same direction as well, even to the point of leaning toward even like LLCs versus nonprofits, because then you have to answer to certain time to board members and other things that they've caused implosions of things as well. So that's interesting wisdom from Fulton Sheen. And what a powerful story, because I mean it was shortly after or immediately after that you then started the Signs of the Times, which is now Signs and Wonders. Is that right?
No, actually, there was an interim period. It had been actually many years before that happened. You know, I had met him in '79, but we started getting. We were very involved in Bible studies in the very much an evangelical community. I didn't feel at that time, you know, I had nowhere near the depth of understanding of magisterial truth. But my wife and I both left the Catholic Church and went to a non-denominational church here in the Northern Virginia area, where it was mostly all ex-Catholics, people like Ollie North. Judge Thomas was there at the time, Supreme Court Justice Thomas. And they had been brought up Catholic, and it was very much faith-based, Bible-based. And that's where we started our journey of spiritual growth around really the Word. And that's been my love to this very, very day. As much as I'm and I've written a lot on Marian theology and spirituality, it's the scriptures that have by far the greatest supremacy of anything.
Wow. Well, let's start diving in here, Ted, because there's a lot that I want people to be able to learn from you as well, including myself, surrounding the big contextual question of, well, what's going on in the world right now? What's going on right now? You know, you're the Signs and Wonders apostolate that you and Maureen run. I have always enjoyed your articles that are in there, yours personally, but the whole the gamut of articles, because they always seem to touch on just what the Holy Spirit is moving on right now. It's very prophetic. I mean, I remember, reading things 10, 15 years ago because my mother always subscribed, and then she'd get me my own subscription. And I'm like, wow, I don't really find this in many other talks or, a couple of things people were touching them. But like you said, when you're not answering to others, you can just speak the truth and let the chips fall where they may and leave it in God's hands. So in light of all of that, you can launch our conversation with that question. What's going on right now? How can Catholics make sense of this? Where should we start to grasp the signs of our times right now?
Well, there's really, in terms of the signs of the times, Peter, I'm not sure there's really an end to that question. I mean, we have so many things going on where we're being consumed by media and information and inputs. And as a result of, we have had the magazine for 35 years. And, it started out, 6 times a year, then 4 times a year. And now there's 3 85-page magazines. And so it's a lot of work to get that together. And there's no end to the social issues. And I come back all of the time, and it's how we've focused. The Blessed Mother has always, do whatever he tells you. Blessed Mother, speaks 7 times in the New Testament, and very, very short outside of the Magnificat. Do whatever he tells you. And I've never lost focus in all of this time that what Jesus did, he had a sole agenda to change hearts. The greatest social issue of the day when Jesus walked the earth was what? It was the issue of taxes for the Jews. And they tried to trap him. And we see he gave a very, very simple answer. Give to Caesar what is Caesar and give to God what is God. So we have never lost sight in any of our ministry, and we've never wanted to be big. All you've got to do is feed the beast by raising money to keep staff going. And I didn't want to ever get into that trap. So we never lost sight, and we've always focused on material that changes hearts. Those are human interest stories, people who have had profound conversions. And so if you look at what Jesus did of changing hearts, you have to always go back to the gospel, no matter who he is with, whether it's the Roman centurion, Mary Magdalene, Martha, Lazarus, Zacchaeus in the sycamore tree, the 12 apostles of incredibly disparate backgrounds where they all hated Matthew when he came in. He had been extorting them, and he brought through his love and discipleship all of these men to his way of understanding. And that's how we've focused on everything that we've done all of these years. And if we've touched a lot of stories on just about everything you can imagine now over 35 years, whether it's private revelation or stories of the church. But where my head is at now in listening to people that are struggling, sex, drugs, and rock and roll have overtaken our culture. For the time being, it has won. Look at the destruction that's going on in the families all around the world. We hear every day stories that are worse than the day before due to vice and sin that has captured individuals, families, neighborhoods, nations, schools, and everything else. And this is how we've veered off course, because we've taken our eyes off discipleship and personal formation. So I'd like to tell just one story that I tell a lot now when I speak. And I think the answer to your question is literally focusing on the essentials of the faith. What are the rubrics? What are the absolute essentials for us to grow? And that is totally where my head is at. It's where all of my writing has gone in one phase or another. It's always incorporated into it. Speak the truth and let the chips fall where they may. God plus one is a majority. You have to change a person's heart. Now, you mentioned I've been in D.C. 44 years, which I have. I've been in town every administration since Richard Nixon, which I was here for 3 or 4 months when I met my wife here. And then she went back to Boston College and I went to London. And so, but I've seen all of these administrations come and go, and they all think they're going to solve the problems when they come in. They're all idealistic. And what happens after a short amount of time, they leave disillusioned. It's why a lot of senators and congressmen just quit. They realize that they come to the sincere conclusion that a lot of them, they're wasting their time. So I tell a story of how, if you've ever seen, the locker room after a major championship sporting event, whether it's the NFL, whether it's the Super Bowl, whether it's the NHL with the Stanley Cup, Major League Baseball, the World Series, FIFA World Cup, whatever it is, an announcer always says the same thing. He sticks the microphone in front of somebody's face, the great star or whatever it is, the MVP, and he says, and listen for this to happen actually after the Super Bowl, which is coming up in a few weeks, 3 weeks. And you're going to hear him, the broadcaster is going to say, "How did you guys get here? How did you get here?" And they're going to say, as a team, we just practice the fundamentals every single day. Let's say it's hockey. Skate, shoot, pass. Don't end up in the penalty box. You can't, 40% chance somebody's going to score with a man down against you. Don't do stupid things. Just practice the fundamentals and execute them. So what is that for us for our faith? What that is very simple. For us in our faith, the fundamentals are mass as frequently as we can, and there's different dioceses where that's easier than others. Confession, as frequently as we can, once or, whether it's once a month, once a week, or once every 2 weeks, wherever the availability. The Blessed Mother's actually calling for daily rosary, prayer, scripture reading, adoration. So we know what these things are, but we don't pay attention to them. Again, the championship team focusing on the essentials. We tend to get off picking daisies very, very quickly and talk about things that don't matter. And the second thing that they say is, as a team, we just enjoy each other's company. We go to the wives get together. They all sit in the same section. They go out to dinner before or after the game. We get together for all of the kids' birthday parties. 10 of us next week or 2 weeks after the season ends, we're all going on a golf trip to Scotland to play golf. And what they're saying in that response is, we enjoy each other's company. We like each other. We're really a community. Now, when you see that, and when you go into a lot of Catholic communities or Christian communities, what you see is just a lot of people bickering and fighting, which is not only unnecessary, but doesn't do anything for anybody. And if a person is a young believer, why would they want to be a part of that if all they do is hear bickering and fighting? Now, it's one thing to talk about things that are important. I get that. But, unity on the essentials, liberty on the unessentials, love overall. And we forget that on a continual basis because Catholics just love to fight about things that don't really matter. Now, I was in Poland. I lived in Poland for 2 years in 1990 and 91 after the Berlin Wall. And when I was in Auschwitz, I went down there one weekend, and it was even actually a February day. It was a cold day, and you saw in Maximilian Kolbe's cell where they gave him carbolic acid. There were red roses and white roses in there, even in the middle of winter, that people had thrown in there. And so there was a sign out there that talked about how and it was a little story outside the gates of how when all of the people were suffering, of how they decided to help each other, and they focused on the essentials of life to live. And there's a lesson in that. And that's why community, I think, is going to be much, much more important going forward in hard times than even in the past. And you're going to have a core group of people around you that think like you, act like you, and will support each other. And whether it's a prayer group or whatever. So focusing in on the fundamentals first and foremost, in a sense of community, in letting the bickering go on stupid things. I've seen it my whole life. People want to be around people who enjoy each other's company, and they run from people that are always bickering. It's in our human nature. You want to be around people you enjoy, and bosses hire people that they like. And don't be the source of division. There are several Catholic ministries. I think everybody's got a role where the eye can't say to the nose, get off my face. The finger can't say to the elbow, get off my arm. We need each other, but there are ministries where all they're doing is focusing in on the negative versus trying to bring people together for conversions through the word.
In light of all of that, what do you think is most important for Catholics right now to become aware of, in the sense of, when you mentioned Marian apparitions and how you've been investigating them for many, many decades, excuse me, unapproved ones, Medjugorje, Garabandal, and others. When you look at those messages, and then you look at what's going on in our times right now, it certainly seems that we are living in the fulfillment of those prophecies of what Our Lady was saying was going to take place if mankind did not turn back to God. And then, an era of, before the era of peace would come, that the world would undergo a purification, and other things that have been prophesied and mentioned. It seems like we're in the fulfillment of that, as the devil's agenda is becoming so wide open. And yet at the same time, he's been able to, I guess, create a cloud of deception for so long that he's able to get away with hiding in plain view. And yet we are experiencing the greatest attacks against marriage, family, life in general. When I talk with Catholics, I just find that there's often not a naivete, but there's an ignorance that I find that can be dangerous, because right now people are making decisions that are affecting their families, their health, and other things that the devil is using to get to them, rather than just like he's just going to scorch the earth through something massive. He's been doing it already. And I know that you've studied these things really carefully. What are the more important things, or most important things, that we should be aware of so that we can make smart decisions as Catholics, especially if we're unaware of these things?
Well, I think it's a great question. I mean, where do you focus your time? We all have roughly 24 hours in a day, and you sleep, you eat, you do your daily chores, you get up, maybe you're going to mass. And so it's a question of, I think people have to realize that we are at a period of history that is literally an end game. I say, and this is not an apocalyptic sense, it's the end of the world as we know it. We are you've seen the little word acronym for that with the letters. And we are in the time of times. We've been told that the Blessed Mother has said, all has been revealed to you. We've been given everything that we need to know. Hosea speaks about study to show thyself approved. And so it's focusing in on being diligent and being the watchman. And we can't afford right now to be fat, dumb, and happy with where the world is at. We need to be very, very focused and disciplined in what's going on. And there isn't anything as volatile today in any family that I know of as the vaccine. And anybody who has studied it will come to a very, very sincere, conclusive, empirically based data that it's an absolute disaster for humanity. And but people are very much dug in. You have those unvaxxed, and we're literally like train tracks, parallel train tracks. The twain never meet. We're incredibly divided on it, and those that are unvaxxed are being told that they're the carriers of it, where actually the spike protein is directly from those that have been vaxxed, but they can't hear a single word they're saying because they're so dug in that they have blocked anybody out with a contrarian opinion. I don't know about you, but there isn't a family I know where this is not a source of division. I mean, personally, for us, we're not even attending a relative's wedding in the middle of February in D.C. because we're unvaxxed, and it's mandatory in D.C. in restaurants to be vaxxed. And we don't want to be a source of contention because people know our position. But what is that? It's like really the same as any other social event. It's a question of speaking up and being aware and how to deal with this. But we're entering an era, a new era, a capital N with a capital E, a second Pentecost, a new Jerusalem, we're told. So the world is in transition to a new place. And I think the event that's going to actually turn that, the only thing, in my opinion, in the entire world that can turn us around, we're so collectively lost, is going to be the miracle, the warning and the miracle that's been prophesied at Garabandal. Or it's the warning, another word is aviso in Spanish, but the life review or the illumination of conscience. Are you pretty familiar with that?
Yes, we are. I am, and I know that's in the past. We did a year ago. We had Christine Watkins on, and she wrote the whole book on the warning, different angles of that. I heard of it when I was in high school, right around the time you wrote The Thunder of Justice. My mother gave me it was a thin white pamphlet, and it simply said the warning, and it
was Father Philip Beebe.
Yeah, okay.
It was that little. It was like
This is white and a black title.
Right.
And it was in our bathroom. So I'm like, the bathroom is a great place to catch up on reading. But I remember even then, discovering these things from my mother, and she was just on top of these things. God was leading her, and that really, she was that spiritual force leading our family during a time of great transition with my father being in an accident, a car accident. It was... Anyway, so yes, I'm familiar with both of those, and I mean many saints have alluded to this. There's even seems to be almost a reference in the Book of Revelation about it as well. About a time where there's there's a pause that takes place in the midst of the big war, and yeah, I mean you don't need massive prophecies to necessarily come to the conclusion of. If there's not some kind of divine intervention very, very, very soon, we are like at literally warp speed, hypersonic speed to complete self-destruction. And we're already on that path already with, I simply call it really, I think what it is a bioweapon that's been developed, to get us from COVID, from a virus that nobody even knows quite what it is. They don't have an isolate of it. To now have a narrative, an endless quote unquote variant, so that it'll never go away unless the people fully wake up and, basically kind of take their freedom back. But it's like now we're in the midst of something where 4.5 billion people now have taken this, and the more we learn about it from the doctors who are out there putting it under a microscope, Spain, America, elsewhere. And they're giving evidence of this. These jabs have some serious stuff in there that you just can't deny. They don't even know what all of it is, but they know.
Yeah, Pfizer's fighting it. They don't want it to be known, and then a judge said it's got to be released in 8 months. Why did they want it sealed for 55 years?
Right.
Yeah, you'll be into your third generation where nobody, they can't be sued. So, and they've already got immunity from being sued anyway.
Right.
But this is diabolical, and this shows that Satan knows his time is short. This is why we know we're in the end game. I'd like to just do one thing, and when we were speaking yesterday, it's a point that I wanted to make, and I don't want to have time run out, but I think it's going to be a great consolation for your readers to hear this here, and it's from Scripture. And it's the story where the prophet Jeremiah was given by the Lord to tell his people how to survive in captivity, that they were going to be sent to captivity for 70 years for their sin, the Jewish people, the Hebrew nation. And it was very interesting, and that's where we see Daniel under Nebuchadnezzar. But in chapter 29, the Lord gives a prescription for people of how to survive in captivity in difficult times. And in light of, I see the confusion that's out there among all of the people today, not knowing what to do, where to turn, where do I find consolation, how do I work, how do I operate? My kids are being deluged with negative information pretty much wherever they go, lies and everything else. And so I was looking for years for this, and then I was reading Jeremiah, and I came upon this story of how the Lord himself told Jeremiah for how the people should survive in captivity. And to a certain extent, we're there today with government tyranny. And I think people, if I'm just going to read a couple of verses of this, but if people look at chapter 29, verses 5 through 15 in the book of Jeremiah, again, Jeremiah 29, here's what the Lord himself tells the people of how they should survive. He says, build houses, settle down, plant gardens, and eat what they produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Choose wives for your sons. Find husbands for your daughters so that these can bear sons and daughters in their turn. You must increase and not decrease. Work for the good of the country to which I have exiled you. Pray to Yahweh on its behalf, since on its welfare yours depends. For Yahweh says this, only when the 70 years of Babylon are over will I visit you and fulfill my promise in your favor by bringing you back to this place. I know the plans I have in mind for you. It is Yahweh who speaks. Plans for peace, not disaster, reserving a future full of hope for you. Then when you call to me to come to plead with me, I will listen. When you seek me, you will find me. When you seek me with all your heart, I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and all the places where I have dispersed you. There is the Lord's prescription for peace, and not necessarily thriving, but surviving in an atmosphere of government tyranny. And he says, build houses, settle down, plant gardens, and eat what you produce. So he's saying, go about your daily business. Do your podcast, do your writing, go to work, commute, get in your car. You've got a computer. It isn't a scythe and a hoe and a tractor all the time. So there is where in other words, that is the fundamentals that we spoke about, before. Focus in on the essentials and do what you need to do. Plant, harvest, give your daughters away, marriage, take care of the grandchildren. And there is the Lord's prescription. I think it's the best I've ever been able to come up with in Scripture for a time like we're talking about. Go back to the fundamentals and stick to the rubrics of your faith. From the Lord himself to Jeremiah. And that's exactly where Daniel lived under Nebuchadnezzar. And we know the way Daniel was treated, and then was after they tried to trap him by eating not wanting to eat the king's rich food, but his, in essence, a good diet. And he was thrown in a lion's den for it. And what did he do? He gave praise and worship in the lion's den. And they did in the furnace, the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They gave praise and worship. So what does that go back to? Sticking to the fundamentals of our faith. It's where it always has to come back to, versus focusing in on the negative all day long. Because there's no end to it. And if anything, it's building. It's getting worse. But we will survive if we continue to do what the Lord is asking, and that's how we'll prosper as our family, in keeping them in the faith.
Well, those are great words, and what a great passage from Jeremiah. It's one of my favorites, although it's often outside of the full context that you read. Usually it's just the one line, I know well the plans I have for you, and depending on one's translation, for peace or welfare, and not for something negative. And to give people an idea of they were all created for a purpose also. And I like to remind people two things. You were created for a purpose at this particular moment in history. So you need to find out what that is. God didn't create you just to sit there and hunker down. The ones that are going to make it, you can say, to the era of peace are going to be found worthy to be of that. Not going to haphazardly make it there for what this world's going to go through. And I always like to remind people too, because some people get nervous and like, well, you'd be a good example of this. People think, but I live like in the belly of the beast. I'm like in Washington, D.C. I'm in a place where, I can't do anything. I said, well, unless the Holy Spirit moves you to move somewhere else, always remember the words of Our Lady. My Immaculate Heart will be your refuge and the way that will lead you to God. So that no matter where you are, as Our Lady reminded us by shielding the 8 German Jesuits at Hiroshima, who lived out the message of Fatima. When Father Schiffer was asked, like, how did you survive this? He said, that's all we did. We prayed the rosary in our home every day. We lived the message of Fatima.
It's a great quote.
Yeah.
He said, I'm not quite sure, but we lived the message of Fatima.
Yeah.
And prayed the rosary every day.
Well, yeah, I don't know what else would have saved them. But that's, I think, it's important for everyone, because there's a lot of fear and worry that I don't feel like I'm where I really want to be when I hear those words of Jeremiah, and I might not be able to do certain things. Is trust that you are where you are for a reason, but truly and dynamically and faithfully live out every day your consecration to Mary, and leave that to her. And then live out to the full where you are and make that difference, because it's somebody else's family that you could be waking up and leading them to God, or giving them a voice of hope. And so I'm really grateful that you shared that, Ted. And I know we're coming right now to the end of our time here. I'd love to have you back. There's a lot of things I'd love for you to help us to grow in our understanding and awareness. That helps us to make decisions, to understand our signs of the times. And maybe you can leave us with one final thought of what do you think is and you have the fundamentals, going back to the fundamentals, looking at this year in a practical way. Is there one thing that you think Catholics should be focusing on to help them to do that?
Absolutely. That'd take me about a nanosecond to respond to, because it's kind of my mantra now. For every single Catholic or believer who's out into the agora, out into the marketplace, there are 4,000 people eating bonbons at night or having coffee all day long, talking about the problems. As I say to people who are depressed or are in despair, go help somebody less fortunate than you, because as soon as you do that, your problems go away. Just if you're missing one arm, find somebody who doesn't have one leg, whatever. You can always help somebody. And I guess the direct answer would be get engaged. A lot of Catholics and a lot of believers in general, they think if they're quiet and they give a pious, I call it a pious pose, which is a negative derogatory statement by me. They give it the pious pose. They're perceived as being holy. If you look at the life of Jesus, he was out in the hot sun, he was sweating, he was actually expending himself. The kenotic effect, as you know as a theologian, of where he was emptying himself, kenosis, and giving himself to others. Get off the easy chair and get involved. Speaking up when it doesn't have to be in your face. The reading yesterday was from St. Paul to Timothy, where he was in the readings in the Mass, just speaking about giving a soft answer, as Paul was talking about Timothy's pedigree with his grandmother Lois and his mother Eunice, and how that had transferred down to Timothy's spirituality. Get involved, be engaged, and when you hear something incorrect or a lie or a heresy, correct it in gentleness and in love. You don't have to be in their face throwing things like the left does, but don't let it slide anymore either. We're here because the church has been silent, and silence is consent. We're here because too few people spoke up when years ago they should have been speaking up, and now we're in this phenomenal crisis in our entire culture where nobody is being spared. So get off the easy chair and get out and do something. Ora et labora, prayer and work. From
Great response. Yeah, that's a great response. I remember what Fulton Sheen had said too. He said this was the time where all those who feel in any way called to reach others through a ministry, whatever it is, Catholics, Jews, Protestants, you name them all. He says, like, we need to be out there clamoring with the truth more than ever. And I'll pull up the exact quote when I post this up. It's a very powerful one, because he would say that the times that we're coming, that this is it's all or none. You're either all in or you're going to be swept away, and we can't sugarcoat it. He used apocalyptic language. He even used the word in the 40s. We were living in the days of the apocalypse, the final days of our era. And so, take these words really seriously. And I'm so grateful that you shared what you did, because I think even for myself, it keeps bringing us back to the fundamentals. I think the devil is as a liar, as his characteristic trademark as being a liar and then a murderer. It's all like sleight of hand. He's just distracting, and so many go for the sleight of hand. And that's why I think it's going to be even harder in the future when the Antichrist comes. He will be the king of deception. And it's sobering when our Lord says, well, he'll shorten the days lest even the elect be deceived. That's sobering to think. Like, people say, oh, like Peter, I'll never deny you, Lord. You know what? I don't have somebody ripping all my food away. I haven't had a gun to my head yet. I don't know. But there's a lot in history. So we need to be firm in the fundamentals, as Ted said. And wow, you've given me a lot. I think our viewers a lot to already ponder. Before we conclude, I'd like for you to share how we can follow more of what you're doing, your writings, any other work that you're doing with Signs and Wonders, or your own initiatives. How can we get tapped into that?
Well, our website is sign.org, sign.org, and that's where I post a lot of my articles there. I probably do one on an average over the last 9 years, probably every 3 weeks or so. And then I do longer ones for the magazine. We've had a magazine now, and we tend to go topical for our magazines. And I tend to do much longer ones for that. I did one just recently on heaven, hell, and purgatory. And then I just did a very long one. It was a 15-page article for the magazine on the origins of the rosary and the power of and the name of the article was called "The Prayer Heaven Gave the World." So in the Old Testament, we have the 10 Commandments. In the New Testament, we have the life of Jesus. And the Lord only gave us one prayer, the Our Father. And, heaven has given, through the Blessed Mother in St. Dominic, the rosary. So as much as many people find it rote and boring, it's the prayer heaven asks us to pray.
Amen. Well, there you go. Go to sign.org and check out everything that's on there. I do encourage you to subscribe to the magazine itself. It's nice to have something digital. You can actually, keep it somewhere and read through it. And I found them to be very, not only prophetic, but also full of a lot of hope. So a lot of treasures that are in there. Thank you, Ted, for all that you're doing. I'm looking forward to tag teaming with your wife, Maureen, who's going to, take us to the next level when we have our time with her. And I'd love to have you back. So thank you for joining us.
I've got some more Fulton Sheen stories too. We'll tell them
Great.
later.
That sounds perfect. Well, thank you so much, Ted, for joining us, and God bless you.
All right, I enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Peter.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us on this another episode of The Catholic Patriot. Please check out what Ted is doing. His great stuff. Check out his books. I'm going to put those all in the description there. You can find them. But especially going all the way back to 1993, The Thunder of Justice. It's a great summary of the Marian apparition age that we are and why, but all the way down to his latest books. I mentioned a slew of things in the beginning, but that was only a small little snapshot of what he's been working on. So check out in the comment section the titles of his books, and then you can click from there and find out more. So thank you again for another episode of The Catholic Patriot with us, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Right is right if nobody is right. Wrong is wrong if everybody is wrong. And believe me, in this error-infested world, what we really need is a church and an authority that is right not when the world is right, but one that is right when the world is wrong.
Never in history has the prayer of the Rosary been more needed to save our families, our countries, and defeat the evils of the world than now. The Fulton Sheen Institute worked closely with the Roman Rosary to develop the most unique, beautiful, and meaningful rosary that was inspired by Fulton Sheen's World Mission Rosary. This special handcrafted rosary continues Sheen's passion to support the mission of the Church to evangelize the entire world. Each decade of the rosary has a different color, which corresponds with a different continent. Yellow for Asia, red for the Americas, white for Europe, blue for the nations of Oceania, and green for Africa. Each Fulton Sheen Aroma Rosary comes with a set of 4 pure essential oil blends that have been chosen for their therapeutic and theological significance. These blends correspond to the 4 mysteries of the Rosary. Simply choose the oil for the mystery of the day, drop a small drop in the palm of your hand, and massage the oil over the surface, being sure to catch the lava beads. You're good to go, and your prayer will linger longer with these beautiful aromatic notes. Every Fulton Sheen Aroma Rosary you purchase supports our mission to fight the battle for the hearts and souls of the Christian family and lead our world back to God. So visit the Fulton Sheen Institute's store and pick up your beautiful Fulton Sheen Aroma Rosary today. Get one for you, your family members, and your close friends, and don't forget your pastor. Thank you so much for your prayers and your support.